Okay, so here we had that treacherous journey, and that's behind him now, and he's all relieved. After Jacob, and we're at middle of verse 14, kind of starting, well, let me go ahead and start at verse 14 of 29. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." This is after he'd been taken back to the house. After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me your wages." Now Laban had two daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, but Rachel had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel a whole month, and he knew he was in love with Rachel a whole month. And so he's committing himself to marry this girl. Of course, is the one that he was sent after to go, that his parents had sent him to go find. And the reason it was 7 years, that seems excessive, but it's very important to understand that in the cultures, even today, when there is a bride price, that you had to come and bring several years' wages. We have a precious youth pastor that just left us to go to be in New York with her husband, that is now her husband, and they are from Kenya, and she still had a bride price that his family had to pay in order to acquire such an amazing woman. And so it would be several years' wages that would accompany these wives that were of great honor. So because he went there basically empty-handed, not even sure if he was going to have food to eat on the way, he went empty-handed. He had to offer this large amount of wage, especially for someone that was as valuable to him as Rachel was. And so that several years' wages would have been in part of the custom of what his family owed her family. And what they would do with those wages usually is that they would take care of what the family had lost from the daughter, whether she was gathering water, they would have to pay someone to gather the water. If she was keeping the house, they would have to then have someone else keep the house and pay them to do that. They would have to acquire someone to take care of the responsibilities that she had been taking care of. And so that's what her value was to the family. And he had to replace for the family her value to the family structure. So that was the whole thing about the bride price. And that's what it would have been in keeping. And I don't think really from the beginning that Laban expected that he was going to give him Leah. I think the 7 years gave him a cushion. Well, maybe somebody will come along for Leah. But when no one did, of course, we go ahead and we know the rest of the story, is that as he goes ahead into his bride week and goes and he wakes up the next morning. Let me go ahead and let's read that. They got married, and when morning came, there was Leah instead of Rachel. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" I'm not sure when they did the switch. Now, it is the custom of these Eastern peoples that the bride, she's completely covered throughout the ceremony. And then when after the next morning, when they come out as a couple, or they come to the wedding feast after it's been consummated, then her face is revealed. So maybe that was the custom at that time. That would be my understanding, that that's why he wouldn't have known. And the tent was dark. I mean, you just kind of speculate going, and maybe he'd had a little bit too much to drink. I don't know. But he didn't realize until morning who it was that he had actually been with the night before, and the deed had been done. And Laban replied, "It is not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one." I mean, that would have been the custom everywhere. And Jacob knew that. "Finish this daughter's bride a week, then we will give you the younger one also in return for another 7 years' work." So now he's a bond servant to go ahead and get both daughters. It was going to take him 14 years. And Jacob did so. He finished the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant Bilhah to the daughter Rachel as her attendant. Jacob made love to Rachel also, and his love for Rachel was greater than his love for Leah, and he worked for Laban another 7 years. So she was very valuable to him. And that really what he did was he worked 14 years for Rachel. He never did work for Leah. And so here we have set up this internal family struggle. The oldest pit against the youngest. Once again, when the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive, but Rachel remained childless. And I'm sure that Leah probably conceived during that first week, because I doubt that he went back into her for quite some time now. He would have owed her as a husband As a matter of fact, she could have divorced him if he had not gone back into her and given her the opportunity to become pregnant from time to time. And so that would have been something he would have regularly done in order to keep there from being disgrace against him in the whole family structure. Now, Leah continues to have children. She has 4 children, and then she stops having them. When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I will die." Well, Jacob became angry with her. "Am I in the place of God who's kept you from having children?" This is a very interesting struggle that's going on in Rachel's life now. So then they start the handmaidens off back and forth. Bilhah and Zilpah start having children. And Leah has another couple. And then it goes ahead in verse 22 of chapter 30. Then God remembered Rachel. He listened to her and enabled her to conceive. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son and said, "God has taken away my disgrace." She named him Joseph and said, "My Lord, may the Lord add to me another son." So she was already anxious to try and catch up. But this idea that God remembered Rachel, that's always disturbing because it's the same idea of when God remembered Noah. Now the thing that's important to understand when I really look closely at this verse, because it bothers me to think that God had forgotten her. It's not the idea of forgotten and then remembered. It's more like God took a memorial, a record. He kept a remembrance of her. So like whenever we set up a memorial and we say, we're not going to forget, and we build this thing, whether it be some sort of we put a plaque out there, or, you have a stake in the ground and it has this information on it. It was that God put a stake there on Rachel, a tag, a banner over her that said, "I'm not going to forget you. I'm remembering you." But for this time later, God remembered that it was a deep understanding of placing a tag on her, placing a banner over her life. And this power, this sign, this distinguishing mark that he put on her was directed toward Rachel specifically, that he would hear her out here. He would hear her out here later, that he would listen. He was listening to her cry, and that he wasn't ever forgotten, that he put a banner over her life to open up her womb now. And isn't it interesting how the Lord creates ways of building our character that can be very painful? And for Rachel, this is what this was. And it's like, "Lord, help me to be the woman you want me to be, but just don't make it very painful. Please make it to where I don't have to suffer very much." And that is what happened here with Rachel, because if Rachel had had the love of her husband and began to bear children, how cruel would that have been to Leah? I think sometimes in our suffering and the things the Lord is teaching us, that he's doing it not only for our benefit and our character and for our development, but he's doing it for the love of someone else. So if you are facing a difficult time, if you feel like that the Lord has let you down in some way, if you feel like he has forgotten you, he hasn't forgotten you. He's putting a banner, his banner of love over you. But why am I going through all of this? Maybe it's not just for your benefit. You're going to benefit from it for his glory and for his honor in your life. I promise you that. And he promises that to us. When we belong to him, he puts a banner of love over us, and he remembers us, and he's building us up for his glory and honor, but also maybe for the benefit of someone else. In Rachel's suffering, the Lord is helping Leah understand her value in his eyes, understand who she is in him. And so as we suffer, as the Lord is building our character, there are those that are being affected by the Lord's work in our lives. And so let us not resist what he's doing for me, through me, not to me, but through me, so that I can then be his servant in every way, even in my suffering. I will receive the Lord's glory and honor through my life, so that he can receive through my life what my life was created for. And so we have this going on in Rachel's life. And it's so hard when we're going through struggles, when we're crying out to God saying, "Lord, I think I've been forgotten." And the Lord's like, "No, I put a tag in you. I put a banner over you. And your time of renewal, all those things, the suffering you go through right now is for your benefit and for my glory and for the benefit of those who are around you." There might be times in our lives that we come into a place where we feel like, Lord, I cannot sustain this. And then at that point, the Lord is like, you have become my wounded healer. And in your life, a dear precious pastor's wife, a friend of mine, told me one time that now that you're bearing this burden with me, this burden that I also have, and this thing has happened in your life, the Lord has made you a wounded healer. So if the Lord is allowing wounds, or maybe it's not the Lord that is in any way, maybe it's someone else's sin, maybe it's something that's going on in our lives that we had absolutely no control over. It wasn't something that we felt like the Lord would have had happen, but the Lord will use it. He will allow our wounds to heal those around us. So embrace it and let it flow through you. Let your wounds, let the things that come into your life flow through you as a healing balm to those around you. Don't resist what the Lord is willing to do with the things in our lives that are difficult, sometimes unbearable. But the Lord will help us bear it up, and he will receive glory. And we will be able to receive the honor of healing those through our wounds that are